Welcome back, everyone, to the Visual Studio Code Insiders Podcast, your behind-the-scenes look at your favorite code editor, Visual Studio Code. I'm your host, James Montemagno, and with me today, software engineer on the VS Code team, Megan Rogge. How's it going, Megan?
It's going great. I'm so happy to be here. I love talking about my work, especially accessibility, so it'll be fun to hear what you have to ask me.
Yeah, I'm really excited because we have tons of accessibility features. It's a huge segment on every single release. Before we dive into some of the accessibility stuff and maybe some of the new stuff that the team has been working on, maybe can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and like what you do on the VS Code team?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I joined Microsoft and the VS Code team right after graduating about 5 years ago, and I've been on the team ever since. And I work on the integrated terminal. I own tasks and I own accessibility for the team.
Oh, wow. Super cool. Do you have a favorite?
Also working on the chat integration with all of those aspects. Did you say, do I have a favorite?
Yeah.
Yes. Accessibility is for sure my favorite.
Why is accessibility so important to you, and why is it so important to the product?
Yeah. So I would say that it's so important to me and has been for a really long time because I myself have dealt with some chronic medical conditions that I think opened my eyes to the challenges that people face out there and how creative solutions can be so empowering to those people and also help others as well. You know, like an accessibility challenge really can benefit everyone, and it just allows you to think outside of the box and enable more people to do cool stuff. So I think it matters to me for that reason. And then it matters to VS Code and has for a really long time. So the cultural feeling on the team is accessibility is important. We want all of our users to succeed in the product. And I think over the past few years, that's even ramped up more as I've been more vocal about my work with screen reader users and other users that have challenges.
Very cool. That's awesome. It sounds like, yeah, like the culture, like you're saying, is accessibility features aren't just like an add-on, they're a core essential part of the product.
Yeah.
So when the team thinks about accessibility, like how does that work inside of VS Code and how does it show up? Maybe for folks that like aren't even aware of accessibility's features, like what does that look like and how does that show up in the product?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the easiest way I can explain this is to describe a section of our users. So that would be screen reader users. So if you are blind, you most likely when interacting with our product would use a screen reader. And what that is it's an application like NVDA on Windows or Mac, VoiceOver on Mac. And that reads the elements on the screen out loud so that you can navigate using the keyboard and then basically operate the product through this audio interface. And screen reader users face a number of challenges and require unique features and things that I help to implement. And so an example of that would be VS Code is amazing because of the abundance of settings and commands that we have to offer. And we have so many different features. So we have the terminal, we have the editor, we have chat. All of these things have so many different commands and so many different key bindings. It's very intimidating to try to keep track of all of that as a screen reader user that's new to the product. And so a feature that I co-developed or brainstormed with screen reader users to build is called the accessibility help dialog. And so this is something that screen reader users can pull up using a keyboard shortcut for any given feature that their focus is on. And it gives an overview of the feature, all of the relevant commands and key bindings they might want to use, and essentially walks them through this so that it's not a guessing game. It doesn't take years to learn, and they have all the important info up front so they can most efficiently navigate and succeed.
When the team is working, when you're working on these features, Megan, like how do you engage the community, right? Because it's one thing to be like, okay, there are these features that, you know, are sort of essential when it comes to accessibility, let's say like vision impairment, right? But how do we actually go about like testing it and getting feedback from our developers that are out there? Because you
Mhm.
and I can test it, but it's very different, you know, to simulate versus actually using the product every single day with like vision impairment, for example.
So, similar to how we're so reliant on our open source community for feedback on what they're looking for, we also rely on users to report accessibility issues, and then we listen to those. But because these groups are the minority of the voices in the open source community, we can't strictly rely on that. So, I meet weekly with a small group of screen reader users to learn about what they are facing in terms of challenges in using our product. They try out new features, and I write down things they encounter that are difficult. We brainstorm solutions. So, carving out that intentional time to meet with the users and learn about their experience, not once a month or once a year, but weekly, so that the most recently introduced features are getting this accessibility perspective, is how we've, I think, been successful in not having accessibility be an afterthought. And then we also have a team-wide practice of the iteration after a feature is introduced. We then test it using screen reader users, using a screen reader ourselves. So the team has this testing practice at the end of every month called the end game, where we try it out ourselves and document any issues. And we do this similar approach, but give 1 month to breathe and let that area owner get the accessibility under control before we then test it out ourselves. And then the last piece of this is we have a dedicated testing team that goes through using screen reader users to make sure we're compliant with the latest web accessibility standards. So it's really 3 or 4 different approaches. And then the last one I would say is just having me on the team and in calls. I think people are always bracing for, well, how will this work with only the keyboard or that kind of thing. And so I think, yeah, having someone that is dedicated to this and always thinking from that perspective is also very helpful.
That's really cool. I was recently, we're in Redmond with a few folks and some of the team, and went to the inclusivity lab where we talk about sort of like Windows and Surface devices and different technologies, because you can make the devices obviously like more inclusive and open and accessible. But then actually if our software isn't, then it is a big challenge. What is like some of the feedback that you hear in these sessions and engagements with developers using these different features?
I had a recent experience with this myself, actually, because I'm working right now on the showing of the terminal output inside the chat.
Yes. Yes.
And this is a very cool feature, but when I'm working with these screen reader users every week and they're like, oh, so excited for accessibility updates. What are they, Megan? And I'm like, well, I don't have any because I've been very busy working on this feature. And so this past week, and so they tried it out and it was moderately accessible, but there were a bunch of issues with it, which I already was aware of. So I actually just addressed those because right after the feature is in, it's my desire to make sure it's mostly accessible. And I think having the accountability of meeting with them every week really drives that forward, for me, at least.
It makes a lot of sense. I think like it's specifically for the terminal output, because it's timely, because it'll be out by the time this podcast is out. I've been using it, and I am a very much like a button click person. Like I'm not a keyboard person, not a terminal person myself, but I am a button clicker. I
Yes.
love clicking mice clickers as fast as I can in the UI. Which often like finds a bunch of weird issues and just like things that are popping up over each other, which is there. But I did notice in this feature, if people don't know about it, in the chat window, normally when a command would get kicked off to the terminal, you'd see the terminal window pop up, you'd see output XYZ. Now there's the feature to have it like inline or even kind of hidden. You don't even see the output. It's just it's happening, right? I noticed that to actually be able to go see it, there's kind of these AI terminals. There's quite a few button clicks around. Like when you went to design that feature and you went to go test the accessibility features, like what are the things that you're thinking about, right? Because
Yes.
as a developer, I'm like, implementing a feature just how I normally would. But what's
Yeah.
like the mindset that you're putting yourself in when you're actually developing these features and then testing these features as well?
Yeah, it's a really great question because I too can get in the mindset of, oh, let me click that, let me click this. But you have to think about how will the user even become aware that there is a change here. And so that is, again, where the accessibility help dialog can come in, where we can say terminals for the chat are hidden by default. And we'll only insert that if this setting is set to X. And we would have a different text inserted if the setting is Y. But the second piece is when you put your focus on such an element, should have a description that's very helpful. And so, for example, with this output, the ARIA label that's included, so when they tab to this, is output for command ls-a, for example, right? And then we have an accessible view hint, which, so the accessible view is a component added around the same time as this accessibility help dialog. And it essentially renders any element as just text, because for screen readers, that is the most easy thing to navigate in. And you can imagine pressing arrow keys will read one character at a time, and there are different keyboard shortcuts that will read the full sentence, etc. So for this terminal output feature that is rendered HTML, that can be tricky to navigate using a screen reader. So the thought was add this accessible view for this feature so they can just run this keyboard shortcut. It will open in this essentially text area where they know exactly how to navigate, and it's very easy for them. And you might be wondering, okay, that's great, but how do they discover that there is this accessible view, let alone the command to open that accessible view?
Yeah.
And that is where the ARIA label hint comes in. So for each of these features around the workbench, we have a hint that says use Alt F2 to open the accessible view. And while that's phenomenal for making things discoverable, imagine you're a screen reader user and you hear this 100 times a day. You'd want to rip your ears off, or at least I would. So we have this behind a setting, so you can disable this, what we call accessible view verbosity hint or something off. So you are new to the product, you want these on, they're on by default, and then you disable the setting because you've learned about this feature, you don't need to hear it anymore. And so this was what we co-developed the idea for in one of these weekly meetings. And Ju Young, who is one of these power screen reader users, is actually a professor, and we co-authored a paper about this whole collaboration because it was so powerful. Him explaining the challenges and then us brainstorming how can we actually fix this when VS Code is really powerful. It could be so accessible, but it's hard to teach a beginner screen reader user what's happening. And so when I think about accessibility for any new feature, I think, how can it be discovered and explained to any user? And then how can one use just the keyboard, not their mouse, to successfully use this?
Are there things that we're doing, like from the engineers are implementing features or the community is implementing features? Are there things that we're doing to actually make that part of the process? I remember like Tyler, for example, recently came on the podcast. He was talking about some of the playwright automation stuff that he was doing. Are there things that we're like building into our process, like catch these things earlier when we're implementing features?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was just looking at this NPM package that is using Playwright to test for accessibility of these features. And I think stuff like that can be powerful and helpful. But the actual user experience, I think, is still the most meaningful one. And so doing both, like how can we insert checks such that accessible code is required, versus I can merge this PR and then I'll get to accessibility when I can. And I think it is a balance, because also you try to then shove accessibility down the throat of a developer that is working on an experimental feature. Even maybe this feature won't actually persist, right? Or maybe it'll change shape dramatically. So they might feel this is premature. It's not solid enough to warrant us investing this time or energy before we know this is the direction we're going to stick with. So I think our waiting a month approach helps to walk the line there of not being so preemptive here, but also mandating that there is some reasonable time in which this must be fixed.
It makes a lot of sense, because like if you don't even know you're going to ship the feature, then you would spend more cycles, and then lets you not even maybe even finish the feature on time, which makes a lot of sense. Can we talk about, I have two other really interesting topics I want to talk about, because we talked a lot about screen readers and accessibility features there, but I'm really interested in colors specifically. My father was colorblind, so whenever I think about software, I always think about the perspective like through his eyes. So like when we think about the colors, the contrast, the things that we're shipping in the box, right? Because I know with Visual Studio Code, it's like everyone loves every single feature, right? Everyone loves every single customization and the colors that you can do. Like, is that an important aspect of like of how we decide what we're shipping in the box, how we're shipping in the box, like how we decide colors, contrast in these features as well? Is that an important accessibility feature? I'm imagining it is, but I'm actually asking because I don't know 100% like
For
how
sure.
that stuff works.
Yeah, we have minimum contrast ratios and consider color blindness in a variety of ways. But one example is any thing that we're trying to highlight or something, it won't just be indicated with color. There will be some other demarcation. Who knows if it's italic or there's an underline or something, just to ensure that is not a blocker for people. And then we have our special high contrast themes that are really helpful for especially low vision developers, but others that have any visual impairment. And these meet even more strict standards, but all of our built-in themes do meet the web accessibility guideline standards, because you should out of the box be able to use the product and feel good about what you're seeing on the screen.
That makes a lot of sense. Like, is there a way, like, let's say I'm a theme developer, like, is there a way that I can run my theme through some accessibility check before I actually ship it?
I wonder if that exists already. Maybe there's an extension for it. That sounds like exactly what a VS Code extension would be great for.
Yeah.
But it is true that it can be tricky looking. I know that at least I have in the past published a theme that had some accessibility issues. So our core set, we try to make sure are really solid for
Makes
people.
a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think I've been using like a lot of like those ones from like I think the Edge team and like the Windows team, like the accessibility checker that you can like put screenshots or like do stuff on the web. I've been running that as like a pass. Like we run that on the VS Code website, I believe, as well, talking for every single, like that's one of the checks. I've also noticed not just in the product, but the product is also the website, right? Where people go and making sure the website's accessible too. We're doing the VS Code Dev Days, and I remember, I think it was Nick, he was like, oh yeah, nothing meets accessibility. I was like, what do I do? And he was teaching me like how to use the tools and run the things. And because I had AI generate a bunch of stuff, it just, the color contrasts weren't correct. So I was like, please, conform and do the thing. And I was like, write a Copilot instruction to make sure like, things are there. So I think as a developer, like learning about the accessibility features, what's important, also helps me craft like better code, right, that I'm writing in my applications to think about. So like make sure I have ARIA tags, make sure I have these things that are accessible.
Which actually reminds me of a point I brought up, when these models are doing most of the code writing or a lot of the code writing for developers, how do we ensure that that code is accessible?
Yeah.
And so it's a lot about what data set they're being trained on. And so I was asking our data scientists to really consider that and use some metric, like how within Microsoft, each product has a grade based on how accessible they are? And could we use that or factor that in determining what we're feeding to these models so that we can ensure proper code gets generated, since this generated code, I'm sure, will be eventually fed back into the model. And this could become a big problem if we don't ensure it's factored in, like in some reasonable time standard, because there's a lot of inaccessible code out there.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story really quick that I think will resonate with exactly what you just said. So we were getting ready to celebrate the Visual Studio, one of the releases, and of that, and a VS Code. And there was all these wallpapers that the design team was creating. And we wanted to create a website for it. And Scott Hanselman, my boss, had like all these community old like Visual Studio and VS Code like wallpapers that community had created. I was like, I'll just vibe code this website out. I'll put on GitHub pages, like no big deal. I sat down, and when you're in a code flow, even when you're code flowing with vibe codes, it was just going. And like I went from like nothing to like, it was resizing images, doing this and this and this and this. And like me and Scott published it within like 2 hours. And we're like, boom, here it is. We registered a domain name. We got it up. And Myra on our team, who like owns like, a bunch of our websites, like developer.microsoft.com and the .NET website. She's like looked at it and she was like, this is like the most inaccessible website. Cause that's like, that's part of her process, right? Is the accessibility check when you put it first. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I was like so embarrassed. And I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down. So I sat down with Copilot, and I did kind of what you're saying is I was like, I'm going to understand all the failure points, put all this in there, and then like had it do all this stuff. And I was like, if it can pass Myra, right, who's been building like accessible websites forever, then it was good. So like I had to craft it and do all this stuff. And then a few hours later, it was like in super great shape. VisualStudioWallpapers.com. You can be the judge if it's even more accessible or not accessible there. And there's cool wallpapers back and forth. But I agree. It's like thinking about it first is how do we do some of the wins, right? I come from the .NET world, and I worked really close with Rachel Kang on the .NET Maui team, now on the Visual Studio team. And her and Shane were big accessibility champions for just putting things in the template, right? File new project should be accessible by default. And they got that up and running. It was really cool because then as a developer, I see, there's already some best practices here, which I just thought was amazing. One thing I'm really interested to maybe give some insight, Megan, into is like sound. Like me as a demoer and advocate, I'm often using just voice because it's like the voice extension is there and I do it as well. But I've also noticed that there seems to be a lot of other like banners, notifications, bings, bops, and like inputs as well. Like how important are additional inputs? And you talked a lot about the keyboard input. What about other inputs and outputs too that like are actually built into VS Code that people may not know about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a really rich array of accessibility signals, they're called. And that means either an announcement, which is just, you can picture the screen reader reading something like focused terminal 1, or a sound that indicates that. And there is a spectrum of preference here. Some screen reader users or low vision users want to hear both. Some only want one or the other. And some are Braille users, so only the announcements would be, felt by them. And so those are really important in our product because we have a lot of visual indicators that happen and stuff that arises, and we need a similar thing but in an auditory manner. And so the accessibility signals have been our answer for that. And those you can look at, whether or not you're visually impaired, I think they're very useful. So, like the chat response received sound is really nice, or user confirmation required. So let's say you're multitasking and you're in a different window, you hear this sound that tells you the agent is finished and needs your confirmation. So that's really cool. And then like a task completed sound or a task failed sound are also really nice if you've got long running build tasks. And again, your focus is elsewhere. You hear it's finished, so you're ready to launch the process. So I think sound is huge for us. And if you haven't looked into these, you might find at least one of them useful, because I have several enabled myself.
If I'm open on VS Code right now, like where should I look? Like where should is there like a big
Great question.
accessibility section? Like I don't know.
So there is. It's because we have so many settings. It became clear that we needed a way for people to review these more efficiently. And so there's a command called accessibility list signal sounds.
I'm opening it right now as we
And you can go down the list and hear all of them. You
Oh,
might have just heard my computer doing that.
yes, I did. That was very cool.
And they're associated with the respective label there. So you can try those out, set them, and then know that you can come back to this command and quick pick to manage all of them right there.
That's very cool. Yeah, and just going in and just typing accessibility, I see there's like just filtering for accessibility, there's like 66 plus, or no,
Yeah.
70 plus different features that are in there. That's astonishing. I mean, it's so cool to like learn more. And then also like, I like that there seems to be like a lot of deep dives as well. I'm seeing there's like links to documentation, and other things like in terminal and different settings that are linking as well. If people are super interested in learning more, is there a good way to connect with you and the team? Is it just through GitHub? Or if people are interested in going deeper and connecting with the team on these things, like what's the next steps for them maybe to do?
I mean, we're an open source project, so GitHub is our home base, and good luck if you email me. But I am responsive on GitHub, and I'd love to hear what people think or if they have ideas for accessibility.
Perfect. That's awesome. Anything else that, kind of looking forward that you'd want to kind of instill on anyone listening?
I think it's important to say that we all have priorities, and it doesn't always feel like accessibility deserves to be that based on, like what might be on the roadmap for your company or your project. But it's extremely meaningful, and it feels that way. So I would encourage people to test it out and see what it's like to use a screen reader, because prior to this work, I had never tried. And you turn on a screen reader and instantly you realize how brilliant others must be to operate the product and succeed. And it humbles you, or at least it humbled me. And it made me want to do better in terms of our product, to enable people to be able to succeed.
That's awesome. Well, I will put links to everything that we talked about today, and to like actually how to use screen readers. And I'll put a link to a few other videos that I found helpful when I was going through and planning for this podcast, some different accessibility features, not only from like what's in the product, but also like how to build different products as well. So I'll put those in there in the show notes. Megan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And don't forget that you can always subscribe in your favorite podcast application. If you're still listening to this at the end, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague, and go through the entire back catalog. Go to vscodepodcast.com. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast app, or you can see our faces on the VS Code YouTube as well. That's going to do it for this VS Code Insiders podcast. So until next time, happy coding.